The 2024 Democratic collapse has triggered a painful postmortem inside the party. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez argues the core credibility problem was not just strategy or messaging. It was that Democrats who spent years blocking a competitive primary were the same voices who later claimed credit for pushing Biden aside. That contradiction, she says, was not lost on voters being asked to rally behind a banner of democracy.
Makes environmental issues not academic, but very real in people's everyday lives.
Yeah, there was a poll from Data for Progress that showed that 63% of voters support pausing construction of AI data centers. Mm-hmm. So your bill is very much a popularist bill, if you will. But I mean, what's also, I think, you can connect it to is the Iran war and how gas prices have been impacted by that too. So there's a way to, I think, as we've talked about, framing Gaza around, as Abdullah Syed has done very well, and you just recently endorsed him, framing Gaza like we shouldn't be spending this amount of money, we should be investing it in our communities. That's also how you can connect that foreign policy issue to environmental racism and environmental investment in this country.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's about talking about these issues in many different ways that are majoritarian. And there are ways that we can frame these debates that talk about why we come to these conclusions from a moral perspective. I think we always have to be making three arguments at the same time for any issue. A moral argument, an economic argument, and also a political argument. And when we're able to argue for something in a chorus of all of those three, then we're able to build a majoritarian coalition to actually win on them.
Building a majoritarian coalition is important, and I know that you, I'm sure, share some of my frustration with efforts that felt like they were narrowing the Democratic coalition, the focus on affluent suburbanites over a more working class coalition. But something that I don't think gets talked enough about is where Democrats lost credibility was on the issue of democracy. And when you say majoritarian bills and things like that, that's a way to demonstrate some sort of democratic responsiveness. But on the genocide in Gaza, many Democrats still aren't listening to their voters, although it's a lot of progress in the House with the 103 Democrats that voted to block that $3 billion shipment. But Gaza, Biden running again when a lot of people wanted a more open primary process. Like, these are choices by the Democrats that box out the voters and make them feel unheard. And so when Kamala Harris was going around and talking about democracy with a banner behind her, they didn't have the credibility that they needed to fight this fascist threat. And I'm curious what you think about that and how the party can be more responsive and demonstrate through action democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I think about all, you brought up a lot of different points. One is, on this Biden issue, it was interesting watching it happen in real time, What I find very interesting about that moment and the people who talk about that time is that I think that some, not all, but some of the Democrats that are most aggressive about getting their narrative out about how they wanted to push Biden out were also the same Democrats that were most aggressive about closing the wagons on a primary process when we had a chance to have that in a presidential election.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of them are compensating because, and you hear sometimes there's these like consultant class and like some of these folks that want, who backed Biden when it was time to step down as like some sort of litmus test.
Gotcha. Okay.
But those folks were part of the establishment that were closing the ranks around Biden before a primary process would have even started.
So you're saying these people just wanted to be the decider, to use a Bushism?
Well, I think it's not just to be a decider, but they saw at the end how unpopular their actions the conclusion that their actions had led to and how unpopular it was. So then it became a race to distance themselves from it.
Gotcha.
So if you run the tape back, right, like there was a moment when the press was asking, do you think Biden should have a primary challenger? And there were some Democrats, many, if not most, at the time that were saying, no, I support him, etc. And there were some that were open. Like I was I will never poop because of the way I got here.
You
can't
defeated an incumbent.
yeah, I defeated an incumbent. So I just feel on principle, I'm never going to say we shouldn't have a primary. But a lot of the Democrats who said, no, we're sticking with him at that time were the same that I think oftentimes are very loud about that litmus test after the fact. So, but I do agree with you. I think that voters and the electorate,
The story of why Congress struggles to act on artificial intelligence does not begin in committee rooms. It begins in campaign accounts. Ocasio-Cortez draws a direct line from the failure of the data center moratorium bill to the source of its opposition: AI companies that have become the single largest block of campaign donors in American politics, now surpassing even Wall Street at its historic peak.
could defeat Donald Trump and the mood that the electorate was actually in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we fast forward to today, the reckoning that we're seeing in some of these primaries, is that what is different between Trump 1 and Trump 2 is that I think your median Democratic voter desperately wants to do everything to get Trump out of power and get Republicans out of power. And in Trump 1, they trusted the establishment to do that.
Yeah.
And in Trump 2, they do not. And we are seeing how that is playing out in real time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Bernie
year.
endorsements, he's batting, over 50% at this point, and he doesn't seem to give a crap what anyone has to say about it. Yeah. He's lost patience with some of that. But yeah, I mean, I think then putting aside Biden for a second, just something like the data center moratorium is, as you say, a majoritarian bill. It's responsive to the mood. And I wonder on the inside if you can shed light on why so many of your colleagues are resistant to that. There's almost like a kind of distaste for the messiness of populism that should be anathema to the Democratic Party right now, in my view, because we're fighting a real threat, this fascist in office.
I mean, the answer is obvious. It's money.
Yes. Yeah. I was lobbing that up for you.
Yeah. In the past couple cycles, when rightfully, there's a ton of concentration on APAC spending. And also, if you look at the top 3 spenders, it's APAC, AI, crypto.
Right.
AI being the largest singular source of campaign financing, not just to people like Donald Trump in many cases, but oftentimes in many House and Senate political campaigns. These folks know, and we look, you go back to 2012, you go back to any other kind of cycle. Like when we throw back to the Great Recession, and during that time, it was Wall Street, it was financial firms. Now it's AI that are kind of the top contributors to our political system. And they know that the game is that you need to bankroll both political parties in order to get your agenda passed. And so the good news is that in the moratorium, I do think that the revolt that is happening in these communities is very palpable and powerful, and it is working because the folks that are signing on to the AI moratorium are not just your expected lefty members of Congress. We are seeing Democrats that are more moderate sign on to the moratorium because the outrage among the electorate is also cutting across ideological lines as well. And so I think that despite the fact that there's a lot of resistance and people not signing on to it, there is also increasingly across ideological support for it too.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your strategy and how that...
The DEFIANCE Act would give victims of non-consensual sexual deepfakes the right to sue their abusers in federal court. It has already passed the Senate unanimously, and it carries bipartisan co-sponsors in the House. Ocasio-Cortez co-authored it alongside Republican Representative Nancy Mace, and yet the bill has stalled repeatedly, with staff on her team told directly that it simply cannot move forward because her name is on it.
The internet, you and Nancy Mace actually have been working together on this DEFIANCE Act. It's a bill that allows victims who have been, the victims of deepfakes, sexually explicit deepfakes, to get recourse. It passed unanimously in the Senate. It has a bunch of bipartisan co-sponsors, and yet Republicans apparently don't want to pass it because it will give you specifically a win. What's going on there?
So I will say that this is not the first time that we've encountered that roadblock, frankly, in both Republican and Democratic majorities. There is a fear about, there is a lot invested in trying to convey an ascendant and popular movement as ineffective. Mm-hmm. And so there is a lot of incentive by our political establishment to do everything they can to maintain that narrative, because it's one of the few things that they have. And I think that in a Republican majority where they are very vulnerable, the last thing they want, I've heard straight up, I've had bills that are, we hear about the flashy stuff. I have bills that are so common sense that pass committee unanimously, that everyone, Republicans agree on, Democrats agree on, swing seat folks agree on, and having people on my team be told this can't move because it has her name on it. And that has happened in the past. Under both party leaderships, and that's okay because we find other ways to be effective. But I do think that when it comes to this issue, I would really implore Speaker Johnson and Republicans, again, this has bipartisan bills. We should not allow pedophiles and sexual abusers to run amok because you just don't like a girl.
Hot take.
Hot take. And I think that there's a lot of political realignment happening in the country, and whether, people like it or not, there actually is a lot of hope that can be generated, among voters of all kinds to actually show us get something meaningful done by people who are most disparate and unlike one another in the House on something that's real. The DEFIANCE Act, we're now at a point where something like 1 in 8 middle schoolers, kids, know someone or have experienced deepfake attacks in this way.
Right.
And to allow this to continue to score a political point is some of the most egregious and horrible activities that we can do. And I actually do think that on this issue, they are capable of being better.
Yeah.
On that note, the DEFIANCE Act remains stalled, but the political pressure is building. With deepfake attacks spreading and AI money flooding congressional campaigns, the question is whether lawmakers can separate common-sense legislation from personal score settling. That tension will test House Republicans in the weeks ahead. Subscribe for more. This is the DC Brief.